Hello there, and welcome back to the Disconnected. I am live with J. Blake Fichera. We're going to call him Blake tonight. Blake is the name behind "Scored to Death," which you will see in the lovely background there, which is hard to answer with what it is because it's kind of everything at the moment. Blake, first of all, thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's the pleasure's all mine with everything that you're working on. But first off, "Scored to Death." What all does that encompass for everybody?
It's well, it started out as books, but it very quickly became a podcast, and now I'm trying to make it into a documentary.
It is a fascinating subject to look at some of the names and information behind some of the scores behind scary movies, and "Scored to Death" seems to be all about horror composers. So, first off, music is that something that's a big part of your background?
Music was always just a passion of mine, and my family. I mean, my family they weren't musicians, but my dad was very into music, all kinds of music, including film music, and that kind of got passed down to my brother and I. And my mom was also very much into music as well. When people ask me about the film music thing, I always just say that it kind of, there was film music just mixed in with all the other records, like, so I just listened to, especially being my age, being born in the late 70s and growing up in the 80s, I listened to a lot of John Williams, and but we had all kinds of stuff. And when I would visit, my parents were divorced, and when I would go visit my dad, I remember like eating dinner to the Chariots of Fire score,
Nice.
Playing in the background. And there's a legendary story about how at a certain age, every time I would get in my dad's car, I would make him put on the Superman score on the tape deck in the car. But when I became a teenager, I got very into the blues music, and I started playing guitar. And then when I got out of college and I was living in the New York City area, I started gigging a lot, put together a blues band, played in various rock bands in New York. But since the blues thing was mine, it was like Jay Blake and the Earthquake, and then it was the Jay Blake Blues Band. That just always kind of stayed constant because I would just shuffle the musicians who are behind me.
That is a very musical name. It just kind of fits with that very well.
And I don't know, I forget the year, but at some point I was inducted into the New York Blues Hall of Fame. So
wow.
But I haven't been gigging in several years now, especially with COVID, and I kind of stopped to do the second book, and then COVID hit, and so like I haven't played live in a long time. But yeah, music and movies have always been huge passions of mine.
Music is in your veins, and I completely get that. And funny enough, you brought up one title that is kind of stricken into my mind that I was going to bring up tonight, and that is I grew up playing saxophone and bass clarinet in a handful of jazz bands and wind ensembles, stuff like that. And to get kids interested, a lot of the times they'll play these random compositions of basically mishmashes of score music. And one of the ones that I appreciated the most was Chariots of Fire. It's so odd that you mentioned that one specifically, but genuinely, it's striking memories of performing that, in our gym in high school and seeing everybody just their eyes light up because, first off, super great trumpet line in that song. And everything that you're shooting out there, it's loud as hell. It's one of those ones where they just say, basically play it as loud as you possibly can. And seeing that and feeling that power resonate with people is always just great to be a part of.
Yeah, I mean, music is, magical in general, but there's something about when it's combined with the image. I feel like it imprints itself like on us in a way that other kinds of music don't. Because now like with just a piece of music, obviously it conveys emotion and we bring ourselves to it, but when it's imprinted onto a movie, and especially something sports related is always very,
Right.
music is always so important. I mean, Rocky's my favorite movie of all time, and Bill Conti's score for Rocky's is my,
It's incredible.
definitely one of my favorite scores of all time. But there's something about it, like by connecting it with story and emotion. I don't know. I think it gets heightened in our psyche in a way that just a piece of music alone doesn't.
I completely agree, and not to minimize it to like a kids movie sort of thing, but one of the things that really kind of solidified the way that I picture this in my mind for me is the way that Inside Out from Pixar went this whole core memory idea. And when I think about it, there are certain things in my mind that watching a movie and hearing the score associated with that scene specifically, I am zapped back to that one night where I can picture what I'm wearing with some of these things, and literally just hearing that piece from the score can take me there, and it's so incredible to feel.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they say smell is the sense that I think is most connected to memory, but I think audio, sonically, it has to be as well. I live in Manhattan and walk, everywhere. I've been working at
Right.
home since COVID, but there was a period of time where I would walk home from work when I was working at that farthest south as you can get on Manhattan, and I would walk like 90 minutes home. And I would listen to podcasts or like the Howard Stern show on Sirius. And there are now, if I walk that route, there's parts of the city when I walk that route, like I remember what I was listening to. And it wasn't even music. It was just like a podcast. I can remember like what was being said, like when I'm standing on a certain corner, like
That's
various
awesome.
parts of the city are connected to like podcast listening and the Howard Stern show in a really weird way for me. And I think it's because that connection of
Right.
the audio.
Especially the show like that makes you laugh all the time. I imagine there's certain things where you go, "Oh man, that was fun," and you start cracking yourself up or
Yeah, it's like,
something.
oh,
That's
this
great.
is where I was when I listened to that like crazy caller that called in on the Howard Stern show.
All right. So, Scored to Death. Like, where did that come from in the very beginning? Obviously, you started with the books. What made you want to write the first book there?
I, starting in the mid 90s when I started to fall in love with John Carpenter's movies and his music, um, I just started getting into horror movie scores. I mean, there was Jaws. It
Yeah.
wasn't like I was completely, I'd never heard horror music before. But John Carpenter was like a big gateway for me. I saw In the Mouth of Madness, and that opening theme is so rocking. And I was an
Oh yeah.
aspiring guitar player, and I was way into like Black Sabbath and Metallica at the time, and Pantera. So it was like it was like custom made for me. And then I got very into John Carpenter, and then a couple years later, I went to college. I went to film school in the late '90s, and I just started to fall in love with the Italian filmmakers like Dario Argento and Lucio Fulci, the Italian filmmakers, and the music that went along with those scores, those movies. But Goblin, I just completely fell in love with Goblin and Fabio
Oh yeah.
Frizzi, and I saw Maniac for the first time, and Jay Chataway's score for that. I just fell in love with. So I just started to fall in love with this style of music, which was at the time, I was listening primarily to like the smaller synth driven stuff.
Yeah.
And so that passion just always was there. And I would go through periods of time like anything. I think we all probably do this, where we get very into an artist or a style of music, and then
Yeah.
we listen to it hardcore for a long time, and then we start to listen to other stuff, and then a year or two or something that passes, and you get into it again, and it's waves. And so I would just always go through these Goblin waves, and Claudio Simonetti, who was the
Oh.
keyboard player for Goblin in 2000, he came out with an album with a band that he created called Daimonia, and it was like a hard prog metal versions of his stuff, and I fell in love with that. And right around that time, Argento had made Sleepless, and four of the main members of Goblin reunited to do that score. And so it just like it would just come in waves. And then in 2011 or so, a version of Goblin formed called New Goblin, and they released a record overseas that I had to buy and have it imported live in Rome. And it just kicked off my love for that music again. It just
Nice.
like it was the cycle. And so they shortly after that they toured here in the States in 2013. It was the new Goblin lineup, but they were touring the United States as quote unquote Goblin. And I saw them live in Brooklyn, and it was a packed house, and it was a set of music I never thought I would see. You know, I had been in love with that band at that point, you know, almost 20 years, and it didn't seem like it was ever going to happen. And it just kicked off just nothing but Goblin for a long time. And I wanted to, basically, I just wanted to know more about them. It's really how it started. And because they were an Italian band, there just wasn't a lot of information here. So I said, maybe I should try to interview Claudio Simonetti because I would like to talk to him. And that just kind of snowballed into what became Scored to Death, because I was like, well, what am I going to interview him for? And then if I'm going to do this, maybe I should interview other people. And then, so, I mean, that's a long way to get it. So I'll cut the, I won't drag that story on much longer.
No, it's fascinating.
But that was really it. It was just, I wanted to know more, and the information I wanted to know wasn't available. And I started to read other film music related books and other film music interview books, even ones with composers I wanted to talk to, like Chris Young, and the information that was in them was great, but it wasn't what I wanted to know. So I just decided to reach out to them and see if they would let me interview them. I had been writing for a blues website, a weekly column, and I'd interviewed some great musicians, some of my guitar heroes like Steve Cropper and Leslie West. And I was trying to do freelance things for horror movie websites. Like I had interviewed Bruce Campbell, who, you know, I love. And so it wasn't like out of the blue. I was like, I'm just going to interview these people. Like I'd already kind of been dipping my toe in that pool. Right. So I did it. And I really thought that not a lot of them would say yes. And I wasn't sure I was the right guy to do the job. So I figured I would interview like 2 of them and see if I thought they were good. Not that the composers were good, but whether I was good at interviewing film music composers. And I said, and I figured, you know, I can get those on a horror movie website. You know, I could edit them down and they can live on somewhere. They're not going to go to waste, but maybe I'm not the right guy to write a book about this. Thinking that most composers would say no, I reached out to like 7, 8, something like that, and they all said yes. And I was like, "Oh, okay." So I guess I'm doing.
I have to do more work now.
So I was just like, I guess I'm going to do it. So that was like late 2013, and I think January of 2014 is when I did the first couple of interviews, which were Harry Manfredini, who did who's best known for Friday the 13th, and Alan Howarth, who was best known for his collaborations with John Carpenter. And so kind of the journey started late 2013, and then with the research and all that. And then by 2014, I was kind of on my way. And I interviewed people for, I don't know, 2 years, a year and a half or something. And the book came out in summer of 2016, which was when John Carpenter toured. And my book, and the book came out in early July. I saw John Carpenter play like a week later here in the city. And I found it incredibly moving. I mean, the guy changed my life. And when he played In the Mouth of Madness live, I literally cried because it was this weird, like full circle thing. Like I just had this book come out and I had never had anything published like that before. And I felt this tremendous amount of accomplishment and I was very proud of it. And then I was seeing him and it was all connected. All the emotions kind of came out and it was like that. And then it was like that night I decided I wanted to do it. My work wasn't done. I wanted to do another one. So it was like 2 concerts that really kind of sparked both books. Were kind of inspired by 2 live concerts of film music. So,
wow. I mean, The hard part here is there's like 19 things I want to respond to, but first, shared passion. I am very, very fortunate and super glad that they're doing it again. I get to go see Goblin in 10 days here in Kansas City. They're doing the Suspiria play along, and I wanted to do that the last 2 or 3 times that they did it, and our kids were too young, so I couldn't make it out there. But oh my gosh, I am like vibrating with excitement for this thing. So I just can't wait. The next thing, John Carpenter, hugely formative for me, hugely formative. In the Mouth of Madness is not one that a lot of people grab onto for some reason. Because first off, the film it's a little weird compared to a lot of the other more accessible mainstream John Carpenter things.
Yeah.
Do you feel the same way about the film as you do, obviously, about the score?
Yeah, because I mean they're kind of connected. You know, it was
very much.
It was when I saw that movie, my friends and I were very into making movies with like my VHS camera. And you know, we were teenagers in the 90s, so it was a lot of like teenage boys trying to be Quentin Tarantino, you know.
Right.
And I think it was my birthday of probably 94, 95, whenever that came out on video. And a bunch of my friends slept over, and we watched that movie, and then we made our first horror movie that night with like the end credits just playing in the background as the music behind us, because it was VHS, you know, we didn't have, you know, you had a family computer and you had to dial up if you were going to go on the internet, if you were lucky, if you had that. So it wasn't like we were editing, you know, it wasn't like it is now. We did everything in camera. And so that movie made a huge impact on me, the music, the movie. And then when I started to kind of research, which again was different because I wasn't, you know, the internet wasn't what it is now. John Carpenter, I was like, who made this movie? Who did the soundtrack? I went out and I bought the soundtrack on CD, and I realized that John Carpenter had directed so many movies that were so important to me my entire life, like everything from, you know, Big Trouble in Little China, and then Escape from New York, and They Live even at that point, and Prince of Darkness. My friends and I had watched that, and you know, also all these movies, The Thing, Christine, I had very weird memories of. Even Starman, I remembered renting with my dad and my stepmom and my brother. Nice. So I just realized, oh my God, this guy's been one of my favorite filmmakers my whole life, and I didn't even know it.
And how fortunate that it was the director and the composer, and it was the same person.
Yeah, and so it just, I love that movie. You know, do I think it's his best movie? Probably not, but it'll always have a special place in my heart. And and I think it's great. I mean, there are, you know, there's certain things that maybe don't work about it as well as they, you know, it has been aged as well as they were then.
I would agree with that.
But ultimately, I think it's a great movie. I love that movie.
One of our local theaters does a Carpenter Fest every year, and they show 3 films back to back. And my wife, before she had met me, had not seen most of Carpenter stuff. She's seen like The Thing and Halloween. I think those are the mainstays, of course. And I took her to this first Carpenter Fest with me, and they started with Assault on Precinct 13, followed that up with Prince of Darkness, and both of them, she was like, "Man, those were pretty good." And they ended the night within the Mouth of Madness, and at the end she was just like, you could see like her face blown back a little bit, like, what was that? I love ending a night with that movie. It is such a compelling piece, especially when compared to the rest of his filmography.
They right around the time that he was touring, or his first album came out or something, I guess it was before the tour, it was when the albums had come out, at the Brooklyn Academy of Music has a big theater, a cinema program in theaters, and they did a huge, they'll do like a month where they play every movie by an artist, by a filmmaker. Wow. And they did a John Carpenter thing where they played every one of his movies. And I live in Manhattan. I don't live in Brooklyn. And so, people in Manhattan are notoriously lazy when it comes to leaving Manhattan. But I was like, I have to go to Brooklyn, but I can't go for every single movie. So I had to be very strategic about what I would go see. And some of it had to do with things like that, you know, I didn't go see The Thing, one, because I knew it would be packed, but two, I have already seen it screened a few times, you know, like in theaters.
And you know it'll come back.
Yeah, and with Prince, you know, Halloween I've seen in theaters. But the movies I chose, I went to go see In the Mouth of Madness, Prince of Darkness, and Starman. Those were the three.
I can't imagine Starman on the big screen.
And yeah, it was magic.
We could obviously turn this into Carpenter talk for the next 2 hours. However, the last thing I really wanted to grab onto is it really resonated with me why you started what you started, because a lot of why I do what I do nowadays is for a lot of the same reasons. As one is, a lot of people were giving just straight bad information out there on physical media and movies, and the other one is it wasn't what I wanted to hear. And so nowadays I'm interviewing people that I'm finding passionate and with things that I enjoy, and that leads to you. I mean, this is kind of like tailor-made for all of my interests, and I think I've said that like 4 or 5 times now, but my God, it is so perfect. And I don't understand how I didn't hear about this previously, but now I just can't wait to get these books in as a part of this campaign that you're running right now. And so you're trying to do a documentary. I'm going to share the screen here. This is what we have at the moment. This is Sunday night, the 16th. We got 16 days ago. Exactly 99 backers at the moment. I'm so excited that somebody might see this and be the 100th one to take you over that edge. What is going to be in this documentary that is not in the book so far?
Well, the book, for the people that don't know the books are collections of in-depth interviews with composers, and between the two books, it's a total of 30 composers. And
wow.
You know, some of them span from, I don't know, 9-10 pages to, you know, 30 pages. You know, like I interviewed for the second book, my interview with Charlie Clouser, who's best known for the Saw movies. He and I chatted for like 4.5 hours. But yet in the second book, I also interviewed 2 Japanese composers, Koji Endo and man, I'm going to look bad here. But there was a language barrier, and I couldn't. Right. We had to exchange emails, so their interviews ended up being much shorter. You know, so it's a weird collection of lengths and the things we talk about. But for the most part, it's the books. They're a lot about the process of scoring movies and kind of biographies of them and their careers and their processes. I don't want the movie to be an abridged version of the books.
Right.
Because, you know, what's the point? The books exist. I can't give all the information that I have in the books. So what I really want to do with the movie is to explore how music works in horror movies in ways that I wasn't able to explore in the books. So I have a few videos floating around on social media and stuff right now where we get to see like Harry Manfredini talking about the and he talks about it in the book, obviously, but I think it's different to see it in action with the movie clips. I have Charlie Clouser from Saw talking about the Hello Zep theme. And like, again, he talks about it in the books, but it's a whole different experience. And I think it's a way of exploring it in a way that I wasn't able to. And I have a whole thing about Bernard Herrmann and Psycho was a video that I cut for this. And that's doing, because more of the history of horror film music is also going to be a part of it. So that's kind of really what I want to do. It's basically what I'm excited about in the movie is that I get to kind of continue exploring this film music, this craft that I've come to love, and I've spent like the last decade now kind of studying, but I get to explore it in ways that I haven't been able to yet. So that's kind of what's exciting about it. And it's going to be, obviously background about some of the most famous themes and scores in horror history, but it's also going to be that stuff, but it's going to be in relation as to how it works in horror. Because I think some people wouldn't agree with this, but I think music has a unique relationship in horror movies compared to other kinds of movies. And so it's kind of going to be about, like, in a way, I guess maybe that's a thesis statement of the film. And we're going to explore like why it's different, how it works, what music does in horror movies, because there's a million things it does, from adding weight and gravitas to a slasher movie, like Richard Band's score for House and Sorority Row, which is this lush orchestral score for an 80s slasher movie, to, you know, everything from, you know, Harry Manfredini and Jaws, how the score kind of becomes the killer when the killer's not on the screen, and you know how the jump scares work and timing and all those things. And so we've already interviewed 5 composers for it. The great thing about doing the books is that wouldn't have imagined in my wildest imagination, but that I've become kind of friendly with a bunch of these guys and girls now. So I called in some favors from the friends, and so we interviewed Charles Bernstein and Harry Manfredini, Richard Band, Charlie Clouser, and Holly Amber Church so far, because I wanted to have material to show when the Kickstarter went up. I wanted to be able to show a video, and I wanted to be able to put videos on social media to show, like, what is it we're trying to do with this. And with the money, depending on how much money we can raise, that's going to be kind of determine, like, how many more people can we put in it. And, or at this point, if we could really make it at all. So,
let this be the lightning rod then. I understand not being extremely optimistic. However, I do hope that a lot of people can band together, because this is the sort of thing that it really is exciting to get an answer to things like that. And to me, and in just a few minutes, I'm sure we're going to bring up physical media and what you've enjoyed with it. But for me, a lot of the reason I buy these movies and Blu-rays and even like vinyl records to have on hand for me to experience them is it gives this context that streaming will never be able to do. And with something like this documentary, it gives not only the context behind some of our, you know, most famous and beloved scenes of all time, but it gives context to where those scenes came from in history and how it can genuinely affect like a generation in ways that we can't really prepare for. And it's not like when they wrote Jaws that they were saying, no, when people hear these 2 low notes for the rest of their life, they're always going to picture a great white. Like, that's not something you can plan for. Yeah. It's like nowadays trying to make a TikTok and say, I'm going viral. That's not how this works. Like, I mean, not to put you on the spot, but are there certain contextual pieces of music that really inspire this that are maybe less thought of? Like, obviously, Hello Zepp is a big one that's a lot more modern. The Jaws theme is huge, but then we got stuff like Jurassic Park or the you know, Indiana Jones themes. Are there other ones perhaps rooted in horror that you say, you know, this does not get enough attention and people really need to pay attention to how much it had an actual cultural impact?
I mean, cultural impact, like, you know, the Halloween score, Jaws, Friday the 13th, Psycho, you know, all those things are, you know, huge. I mean, they're Jaws, Psycho. I mean, can you think of more? If you were to, like, think about the pieces of music that have been used in other movies the most, whether it's parody or not, Jaws, Psycho are among the top. Good, Bad, the Ugly, Bad to the Bone. You know, those are like the big 4, and 2 of them happen to be, you know, horror movie cues. And Bad to the Bone was in Christine, so in a weird way, that also is a horror movie cue. It's just, you know, through doing the books, I just realized kind of how unique, I mean, film music is in general, but how unique it is in horror movies. And that's what really kind of drove me. It was like talking to all these composers is what inspired the idea, really, to continue to continue to interview composers, but to, like, okay, like, the way Charlie Clouser talks about the Hello Zepp theme, and, you know, the interview that I have online right now from my interview for the movie is very short. And I think you can get you can get a feel for it, but the way he talks about it and why he did the things he did are fascinating. It comes at the end of the movie when when the viewer is being bombarded with all this information. You're seeing all the things from during the movie that you didn't see and all this stuff. So the way he talks about it is he had to keep it really simple because it couldn't be distracting. It had to be easy for the brain to decode,
right? So
that it wouldn't interfere with all the information that the brain is getting through the visuals and contextually in the movie. And it's just stuff that I never would have thought about that, but stuff that these guys think about it. And I find it fascinating to hear them talk about it. And my hope is that other people will too, because look, horror genre has a huge and passionate fan base, and film music has a huge and passionate fan base, and horror film music fans may be a subsect of both of those things, but they're really passionate. And I want to do something for them. My hope is that in the remainder the last 2 weeks of the campaign, we'll start to get some traction, because I think it's I think it's a good. I think the information that I've heard so far for the movie, in the interviews I've already done, I think is really great. And that's not because of me. It's because of, these amazing artists. And that was always my intent for the books too. When I started doing the books, I never felt that they were my books. There was always, they were my books and they were the composer's books, because it was their stories and it was their generosity and their time. They're much more a part of the books than I am. And I think they're people that kind of deserve more credit than they get. And I think of the film that way too. I'm making the movie, but it's really the composer's movie, and to help them tell their stories and to kind of shed some light on this craft, this art form that I think is endlessly fascinating. I mean, like I said, I've already spent 10 years talking to composers and I haven't gotten tired of it yet. That's how interesting it is. I just keep on talking to more people and it's been amazing. I mean, it's changed my life, and I really would love to make this movie. And the idea of raising the funds, and the hope is that ultimately we'll raise funds to not just make the movie, but make a movie that can reach the potential for what's there. So, that's kind of where we're at now.
Well, that's the thing. Even, it's just as someone who's discovered everything related to Scored to Death in the last 3 weeks or so, you can tell reading through your copy, the reviews for the books, the information that's already out there based on the podcast, all of it, the passion just kind of oozes out of it. And it's something that you can tell it's somebody that genuinely cares, which a lot of times that's not hard to decipher. And with this, it's very obvious that you're just all in on it. And it's so appreciative, because one of the things you said just a moment ago is really true in this sector specifically. And that's how underappreciated some of these people are. You've mentioned some of the bigger names. I'm just curious, just based on your own personal relation to everything, are there other composers that you would like to highlight right now that are perhaps vastly underappreciated, that you think probably deserve to be up here closer to the Mount Rushmore of horror scores?
Well, I mean, there's big people that I don't think are known. They're not considered horror movie composers, but Jerry Goldsmith has done some of the greatest horror scores of all time.
Oh yeah.
I mean, just happens to be also one of the on the Mount Rushmore of horror movie of film score in general. Yeah, I mean, obviously interviewing 30 of them for the movies, and then interviewing some more for Scored to Death, the podcast. It's really been fascinating. And I love Jay Chataway's stuff. I mean, especially the first book was really just who do I love? Whose music do I love? Who do I want to talk to? And Jay Chataway, he's most he's known to most people for scoring Star Trek television, like The Next Generation and Voyager and stuff like that. But for horror movie fans, he did Maniac, he did Maniac Cop, he did Silver Bullet, which was one of my favorite movies of all time.
Nice.
So it was really important to me, for me to interview him in the first book. And he's one that I don't think a lot of people talk about much.
I agree.
John Harrison, who's in the second book, he didn't do a whole lot because he became a director, but he did Creepshow and Day of the Dead for George Romero. And his interview is great because he is a director. So we talk about some of that. We talk about George Romero a lot. I mean, that's the other thing is right before the first book, right while I was doing the first book, Wes Craven died. And then while I was doing the second book, George Romero died. And so it was also kind of amazing to be able to talk to these composers about these great filmmakers that we lost. You know, the first book and they both have dedications to those filmmakers at the beginning of the books. But to be able to talk to Charles Bernstein and Harry Manfredini about Wes Craven in the first book, and then after he had passed, and then being able to talk to Donald Rubinstein and John Harrison in the second book about George Romero after George Romero passed. I mean, it was a big deal because it's also, the books also shine a lot of light on the filmmakers that they're working with and the relationship between a director and the composers and stuff. The other person that I would highlight who's in the second book is I had the extreme honor of being able to interview Robert Cobert, who probably most people don't really know who he is now, but he wrote all the music for the Dark Shadows television series. And he wrote the music for the original TV movies for Kolchak before it became the TV series Kolchak the Night Stalker.
Yep.
He did Trilogy of Terror. He was like 94 when I interviewed him. And
wow.
And it was a highlight of my life to talk to him for 2 hours. And we had the most fun time. He was, still sharp as a tack and mouth of a sailor. And he enjoyed busting my balls during the interview. And we just had the most fun time and walking him like down memory lane and talking to, he's telling me stories about being like a teenager and playing in a jazz band in the Catskills for the summer and trying to get laid. And it was just the most fun experience. And unfortunately, he died at like 96 in early 2020 before the book came out. So it's been great to be able to talk to some of these people and you get to highlight guys like that who at this point not a lot of people think about or know about, but to be able to tell his story was kind of very special to me.
That's awesome. What about a horror composer that had passed before you started on this project that you would just be spouting off questions left and right because you'd be so excited?
I mean, Jerry Goldsmith, Bernard Herrmann, any of the greats, there's so many. That's the unfortunate thing is getting to it kind of so late that we missed so many. But that's something that's been kind of interesting to do with the movie, which I didn't do a whole lot of with the book. A lot of composers brought up Bernard Herrmann in the books, kind of just on their own merit. But to sit down with composers now on camera and say, like, why does Bernard Herrmann come up so much? And to talk about them specifically, or, because I also, with the movie, I want to highlight some of the great scores of all time. So to be able to talk to these composers about like the Omen score by Jerry Goldsmith and get their take on Jerry Goldsmith, because film composers love Jerry Goldsmith. I haven't found one yet that doesn't like idolize him. So to be able to highlight some of these scores that I didn't get to highlight in the book because the chapters were mostly really about the person I was interviewing, but now that the movie is something kind of totally different, you get to highlight scores a little bit more. So I don't know. So there's ton, and there's ton that are still alive that I would love to interview that I haven't gotten to interview yet. So
Well, hopefully there's a Scored to Death 9 through 17 in the future at some point. I
We'll get the movie done first, and then we'll.
when speaking of that, again, call to action, because this is the sort of thing. Well, first of all, to highlight, like, genre fans are kind of the ones that have kept a lot of things alive in history, because they come out and actually financially support a lot of these projects. I mean, I think it's kind of like an open Hollywood secret that a lot of films only exist because genre fans, they come out for the horror movies, and those subsidize a lot of the more expensive projects. And it seems like nowadays with physical media, horror soundtracks are doing really well. Like, you got Waxwork Records out there putting out brand new ones every single Friday. You've got what is the other big one? TerrorVision does a lot of them.
Yeah, Mondo and Death Waltz, and
of course,
that had just started when I started the book. You know, I think Mondo had put out a couple. I don't think Waxwork had put any out yet when I started the book, but by the time the book was done, like, everything was like crescendoing. Like, the book came out, the first book came out like at the perfect moment, because, like I said, Carpenter was just about to go on tour, and all these like boutique record labels had kind of popped up, and were putting out records while I was doing the book. So that by the time the book that came out, like, horror film music was kind of at its peak in popularity.
And now, like, Waxwork has exploded. I mean, they're selling out of stuff sometimes in literally a couple days, and for big things. And not to mention, they're putting out stuff that's never been released on vinyl, which is a huge plus nowadays. All of those types of vinyls, are you still into anything like that, or get excited about any of those releases?
Yeah, well, look, when I was doing the books and then post the books and in between the books, I've always been a bit of a I guess a media addict, like,
Yep.
When it was VHS tapes, I had 1,000 of them. When it was Blu-rays, I mean, it was DVDs, I had thousands of them. And then Blu-ray came around and just kept on building. And vinyl was no different. I mean, I had vinyls. I always had a turntable, but then when the horror movie soundtracks started coming out, I got into it big time. And I've had the honor of writing liner notes for some of them, like Halloween's 4 and 5 and Freddy versus Jason. And
nice.
I mean, I'm now kind of trying to unload everything, because I live in a tiny apartment in Manhattan, and I would love to at some point.
Wait, is Manhattan expensive or something for space? I've never heard that ever.
And records take up a lot of room. And when the first book came out, I kind of did like the horror movie convention circuit.
Oh, nice.
And I would get a table to try to sell the book, and I started buying lots of records to sell. I was like, I'll draw them into the table with records, and then I'll sell them the book. And so I still have boxes of like inventory from that too.
Oh,
so
geez.
I mean, I have hundreds and hundreds of horror movie soundtracks on records. I have some of them. I have 4 copies of them, and I don't know, 2,000 Blu-rays or something. And I still collect CDs, because I started doing podcasts, and right now I'm doing a podcast called Scored to Death Radio, where I play music. And before that, I was doing a show called Cuts from the Crypt, which somebody invited me to come and do. And so I started buying CDs again, because they were so much easier to kind of like rip onto the computer to put into a podcast. So I also have hundreds and hundreds of film soundtracks on CD and horror movie soundtracks on CD. So, unfortunately, you get so many books. I have tons of books. You get to a point when you have so little space that you can't get to everything. Like everything's like 5 deep or stacked, and so now I'm in the process of trying to get rid of everything. I want to eventually move to the West Coast, and I don't want to drag too much stuff. I'll start over when I get there.
Right. I get
but
that.
part of but yeah, I mean, look, the internet changed the way we consume everything,
of course,
including physical media, like like Shout Factory and Arrow and Mondo and all the records and stuff like that couldn't exist without the internet and social media and kind of the way those things work. So it's been a tremendous boom. You know, in the late 90s, there were companies like Anchor Bay that were doing the Lord's
Huge.
work by, by doing, releasing widescreen VHS tapes of Lucio Fulci movies and Dario Argento movies, Mario Bava. And now it's, it's, I think it's a double-edged sword in a way. Like, you used to have to hunt for stuff. And there was a certain excitement about it, but now everything's really easy to get, which is fantastic. But then part of the reason why, like, I'm also just like kind of stopping the physical media thing is because, like, how many copies of Halloween do I really need? It's an addiction, really. So, and at some point I just had to cut the cold turkey. Like, I had 4 VHS tapes of Halloween, and then I had, every time Halloween would come out on DVD, and Evil Dead would come out on these evergreen titles that had like 1 million titles, and now 4K is starting. I got overwhelmed, and not to mention I'm trying to make a movie, so I'm downsizing. I'm trying to make some. We've already spent, before the crowdfunding started, I mean, I've already spent like over $10,000 on the movie, so wow. Kind of out of pocket to fly to LA to interview these guys, to get equipment and all that stuff. So part of like my slowing down and kind of getting rid of everything is also just like, I could use the money right now to pursue my creative exploits. And because there'll be 4Ks everything in no time, and I can start fresh when everything's on 4K.
Yeah, that's a good point. As a little aside, I'll just throw this up here again to everybody. I've already backed this. This is something that I'm very eager to see the final product. Not to mention, I also backed to get the books. I'm so eager to be able to read those front to back and just dive right in. I sincerely hope that we can get this up to like 300 people pledged by the end of this, because this would, at the very least, because this is something that can really light up a generation of not only film fans, but of music fans, but of people that want to create music in the future. And we need people that are continuing to do that. And again, just not to make it sound like I'm kissing up or anything, I thank you, because this sort of thing, it needs archival. That's a big part of it. And we're entering that era where a lot of these creators, sadly, are kind of dying away. And it's going to be something that will continue for the rest of the time now that we're into the filmmaker's age. And you're literally encapsulating their words on page. So it's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely a part of it. It was, the first book is very weighted in composers whose career started in the 70s and worked throughout the 80s, with a smattering of more quote unquote contemporary composers.
Right.
So the second book, I kind of went the other direction with it. It's a lot of younger composers comparatively whose career started in the 90s and the 2000s. And I interviewed some Italian composers in the first book. So I interviewed some Japanese composers in the second book. And yeah, I mean, it's important. I mean, not to make the books seem more important than they are to most people, but to me, like there is like a responsibility to kind of like document
there absolutely
the work, these people, and what they've done. Bob Cobert was just kind of the most extreme example of it, because he was so old, and I knew that, like, at 94, like, how much more time does the guy have? So right. Even if he lived to be 100, I mean, that's still, still like not a whole lot of time. So,
right.
Yeah, I mean, I do. It's kind of a responsibility that I don't take lightly, and when I do the interviews, especially for the books, the movie is obviously a very different thing. It was like, I strive to do the definitive interview with them. And that's why I kind of ask for a lot of time. And most of them are extremely generous with their time. And I mean, they all are, obviously. Some of them are just don't have a lot of it.
Right.
Like Bear McCreary's busy scoring like 15 movies a year and television shows. I don't know when the guy sleeps, let alone take an hour out of his schedule to talk to me. So, Yeah, I mean it's important. And I'm not just talking about horror composers. You know, like I think one of the driving forces behind all of this, obviously I love film music and I love horror movies, and that was kind of like the main influence, but I just love talking to creative people. And I before I started doing the books, I didn't really think of myself as like some expert on horror film music or some, you know, like elite fan. Like I love them more than anybody else. Like
Right.
now that I've been in the community and I've been to horror conventions and I've talked to people and I've been interviewed on podcasts. Like I realized that like I'm really small potatoes when it comes to like the passion for this in some ways. You know, like some people are really, really into it. Um, I just love talking to creative people about what they do. And
Same.
I managed to like carve out this little niche for myself where at the time nobody was talking to these people. And there was enough information that I wanted to know that I was able to just kind of start and make something of it. And my appreciation for it and everything I know about the craft has been through this experience of doing the books. You know what I mean? Like people, you know, refer to me as like some kind of expert now because I have the books, and I'm really not. Like everything I know about this, you can know too by reading these books. You know, like everything I learned from them. So, and it was through talking to them that I gained like so much more respect for the craft and
Right.
what they do and how they do it. And so I keep going until I don't, you know, I've often thought about switching topics, you know, like I would love to do an acting book, like horror movie actors. And there was a time when I thought about doing it, and there was a time when I thought about doing special effects, but then luckily I didn't because people have done special effects books.
Yeah.
But I keep doing the music stuff because I still find it interesting, and I keep still finding more things to fall in love with about it. And every time I interview somebody new, it's like a whole new roller coaster for me, and learn and their point of views about it. It's just everything's unique. Whether even when they're talking about the same thing, and they're even talking about how they do things the same way, it's still unique because everybody's got a different perspective on it. And
Right.
so, you know, I love movies, and I went to film school and I always wanted to make a movie. And when I did the first book, I wanted to make the movie then. But I was kind of glad I didn't, because doing the second book and doing the podcasts, and, you know, it's just like I learned so much more, and I developed relationships with
Nice.
so many more composers. And so I think like the movie I can make now is a much better movie than I would have been able to make in 2016 after the first book. Like I feel like I'm ready to do it now. And that's why I wanted to do it. I've been trying to put it together through COVID, you know, and was starting to try to figure everything out before COVID, and then COVID hit and everything got delayed. And then I was trying to sell it as a TV show because my day job is in television, and just things weren't working out. And people were interested, but it was like there was talk of like they just wanted to buy the idea from me and they didn't want me involved. And I was like, well, this is like, you know, like I can't
Yikes.
sell the title, you know, like I'm at Scored to Death on social media. You know?
Right.
Like at this point, like I am kind of Scored to Death. I can't just sell like a title to you.
Damn.
So I kind of said, all right, you know, like if I want to do it and I want to be a part of it, you know, and I want it done the way I want it done, not necessarily the right way, but
Right.
you know, if I want to make the movie that I want to see, which is what the books were, they were the books that I wanted to read, I'm going to have to do it myself. And the campaign runs to November 1st. If we're getting close, I've talked to Kickstarter. There's a chance they may let me extend it for a little bit, but that's not a definite.
Yeah.
It's been educational and kind of a real eye opener, this experience. I'm not going to lie. I've been a little shocked at the lack of support it's gotten from horror movie websites and stuff, but maybe doing it in
Hmm.
October was not a good idea because there's just like
There's a lot.
There's a glut of, horror material to
Right.
report on, and that's on me. That's my I'll take responsibility for that one.
Well, I guarantee you we'll get it. We'll get at least 5 more supporters just for doing this video.
Every little bit counts, and that's what I've been saying. It's like, the beautiful thing about crowdfunding is I think some people will look at it and say, well, like, I can't give $25 for this. I can't get a Blu-ray for $50. And, if everybody can give a little bit, then it can make a huge difference. And even if you can't give, just spreading the word is, letting people know the campaign exists. I mean, the frustration for me has not been the money, because I understand, not everybody has the means to do it. The frustration for me so far has been like the people who I really expected would help promote it, not promoting it, because that doesn't cost anything. And, so I thank you for giving me a platform here to talk about it and let people know about it, because that's like the real important thing, is like getting the word out. And now there's like 2 weeks left. I'm optimistic, and if we can't raise the money, it's Kickstarter. I don't get any of the money if we don't reach the goal, but I'll figure it out. If I can't do it through crowdfunding, I'll figure out some other way to do it, because it's like you said, for me, it's a love letter to this, and it's a passion for me, and it really is a project that I'm doing out of love. And we'll get a movie made, whether it's the best, like whether it's a movie that can live up to the potential. That's going to depend on how much money we can raise, because there's all the rights to use the stuff, and lawyers to do fair use, where I don't have to pay for the clips. You need to pay a lawyer to make sure that all works. It gets really complicated and expensive. Yeah. And so it's not like I could just like take the $10,000. Like, I could make a movie now with the 5 interviews I've done. But it won't be the movie that I feel like this topic deserves to have. And so that's really it. I mean, I want to make a movie that's worthy of the topic and the composers and the fans, so that's where we're at. And hopefully a movie will get made. Just what movie will get made, we'll see.
Well, either way, I can't wait to watch it. I do want to throw out there that even though there's a lot of downplaying your commitments and contributions to this, every single museum out there has to have somebody that starts it. And I, again, just thank you for making this museum, because without it, a lot of those voices would be lost. And it's something that is important. And archival is something that really doesn't get talked about enough in society, because people just look at a lot of this as a given, I think, still. And accessibility is great, but I think streaming and all that has given people the idea that this is just here forever. And a lot of it is not, unless we do something properly to actually archive it. Spotify servers can be wiped tomorrow. We have no clue about any of that. So
that's a good point. Yeah. I appreciate that. This is the pleasure has been all mine to this act of archiving all this stuff. I mean, it really has been such a wonderful experience. I wouldn't still be doing it now after 2 books and podcasts if it wasn't fulfilling. And if it wasn't for the feedback that I get, that I know I've had composers who have contacted me and have thanked me for doing it because they've learned from it, and which is amazing, and it's those are kinds of things that you'd never think about or about.
Right.
Like, a book isn't necessarily on, it's not on the internet, and it's not, podcast is also still, I mean, as you're doing this, like, you don't know everybody that's listening to it, but like people that are watching this right now and watching all the other shows, it's making an impact, and it's influencing people's in a way that, like, you'll never know the extent of it. And having now had the books out for a few years, to hear feedback it's really been kind of overwhelming in terms of the way the books have inspired people and impacted people, the things that I never would have expected, which is a good thing to, bring up in terms of the campaign for people that are physical media collectors. With the campaign, this is a perfect example. Not knowing how much money would be raised, I couldn't promise a soundtrack because I don't know if there's going to be enough money to hire a composer to do it, whether I'm going to have to do it with library cues, and then I can't release those. So what I did do for the campaign is I reached out to a bunch of composers and artists, and I said, hey, I'm trying to make a movie. Will you lend your time and your talent to the project by recording a new cover of a horror movie theme and then giving it to me for free to put it on a CD and a vinyl record so that I can try to raise money to make the movie. And so far we have, I think 8 or 9 have said yes. Alan Howarth, the band Voyager, the band Anima Morte, Steve Moore from the band Zombie, Holly Amber Church, who's in the book, the Blair Brothers, who are great composers, Richard Christie from the Howard Stern Show, which we were just talking about earlier. He's a phenomenal heavy metal drummer, and he's a friend of mine, and he's a huge fanatic of horror film music, and so he's doing a cover of a John Carpenter tune. So all these artists have been, here's a perfect example of like, I reached out to a bunch of people I was a fan of, and I said, hey, I'm trying to do this. And they believed enough in the project to say like, yeah, so we're having, newly recorded versions of themes by John Carpenter and Fabio Frizzi and, stuff from The Shining and stuff from Bram Stoker's Dracula. These people are recording new versions of these things exclusively for a limited edition release on vinyl and CD, just in an effort to try to raise money. So for everybody that collects stuff out there, that's to me, that's like as exciting as the movie to put all this together. Cause like, not only by now, it's really 2 campaigns in one, really. Cause it's like, I'm also producing a record.
Right. And you can get both for $100 right here. I mean, that's a damn bargain, to be quite honest. When you're doing this from the ground up, that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's going to be, I've heard some of the stuff so far, and it's really cool. It's, it's really interesting to see everybody kind of pull their own, put their own spin on some of the things. And Wojciech Golczewski is another, he's a great composer who I love, who's done some great horror movies, and he's also contributing something. So it's been I mean, I almost completely forgot about that because now I'm so like in the movie mode, but it was like, oh yeah, like I forgot, like I'm also producing a record, which is like kind of as cool, if not cooler than the movie itself. So that's going to be kind of exclusively available through the Kickstarter. And then maybe at some point, if we still have copies left over, we'll make those available in another way. But we're only going to press, I think we're going to try to keep it to like 500 tops for the record. But obviously, if we don't sell 500 of them through the Kickstarter, like we'll make less of them. It's really, we're going to keep it as, we're trying to raise money, not make profits. I'm not really bogged down with a bunch of inventory that I can't move for the movie. So it's really going to be really limited, very cool collection of stuff. And but that's another example of just like what I was saying about like the support and the people that have reached out. The stuff is the internet and all these things. It's fascinating to when you start to. I do a podcast called Saturday Night Movie Sleepovers as well, and the feedback we get from that, it's just, you don't realize how big the reach is. It's like the pebble in the pond, like the ripples of that reach out like really far. And that's been the fascinating thing about the books, is the not just the composers I've met and become friendly with, but the fellow horror music fans and film music fans that I've met and become friendly with, and people that I genuinely consider really close friends, or people that I met like at my book signing for the first book, because we share this passion together. And it's been just an amazing experience. And I'm hoping the movie will just kind of move that experience on to the next level and keep it going for us.
And that's the thing. Things like this, they build genuine communities. And that's also important moving forward too. I mean, we all just came out of this almost, it's still going technically, but a pandemic that we all pretend doesn't exist anymore. And so many of us were isolated to a point where we kind of had to find these little niche communities. And something like Scored to Death can, not to make it, macabre in here or anything like that, but save a lot of people from that depression of isolation or going through a tough time, and just finding out that other people enjoy the same things you do can really keep you going sometimes. So it's nice to see this and participate and share the campaigns, and just make people understand that, hey, I'm a fan of this thing. And without that, these things can't be made. Sometimes these things can't grow. These things can't ever even see the light of day. So to show that, passion and support, you really got to do even the freest thing just by clicking that little share button.
Yeah, just help spread the word, support if you can, financially, but if you can't, just letting people know it exists and getting the word out is, just as important. Because, for instance, you were saying like you didn't even know any of this stuff existed until somebody
before,
brought
like
it
a
up.
month ago. Yeah.
Yeah. Like the books, the books have been around a long time. So, it's about just passing the word and passing information. So if you know anybody that is into horror movies and film music, like if they haven't heard of it, this might be right up their alley, whether it's the movie or the books or the podcast or, any of this stuff.
Or a new soundtrack. I mean, look at that. This is freaking great.
Yeah, that's kind of really exciting. I was really shocked when people started saying yes to that. But that's kind of been my motto about everything, including the books. The books only existed because I said to myself, like, I'll just start reaching out to people and asking.
Right.
And see what happens. And though my whole, 30 plus composers have said, sure, at this point. I got a publishing deal because I started emailing publishers and I said, I'm writing this book. Do you want to publish it? And somebody said, yeah, it sounds interesting. Sure. I wanted to do a record, not just, because I thought it'd be cool to make a record, but also to try to raise money for the movie. And I started reaching out to professional musicians and composers and saying like, will you do what you do professionally for somebody else? Will you do that for me for free? And everybody's been like, great. I mean, obviously some people have said no. People like, we're touring, we don't have time, that kind of stuff. But the fact that as many people have said yes has just been amazing. And that just goes to show you like, it never hurts to ask. What's the worst that can happen? Somebody says no. And it just goes to show you like how generous people can be. These people who are scoring a movie, taking time out to, come up with a new arrangement of a horror movie, an existing horror movie thing, so that I can put it on a record.
Right.
But they're fellow film music fans and horror movie fans, and they're excited to be a part of it, and they want to see the movie get made, and they said yes, which is amazing to me. But so it's just the whole thing's been kind of fantastic. So I'm excited to make the movie. Just the little bit of the movie that I've shot so far, and these videos I've been putting together for the Kickstarter campaign and for social media. It's been really exciting just to like go through the footage and see what we have now, and putting even keeping everything down to like 2 minutes so that I can put it on social media. But knowing that there's so much more than those 2 minutes that are fascinating, and to be now, so it's exciting to see like, wow, like there's so much cool stuff. And the idea of Blu-ray and physical media is amazing because like the Kickstarter has a option for a bonus disc, because there's all this material that obviously can't fit into like a 2-hour movie. I personally don't want it to be like a 5-hour documentary. That's just like, those are fine. People love them.
Doesn't do well in the festival circuit either.
Like that's there's a place for those movies. So that's not what I want this movie to be. But through like the beauty of, physical media, like we can give you hours of material that didn't make it into the movie. Interviews, sections of, extended interviews. We can put in whole sections of stuff that doesn't make it to the movie as kind of bonus content, and that's kind of amazing. That's because when you interview so many people, you're gonna edit it into a movie. I mean, I'm a professional editor. I edit television stuff, so I said to the composers as I'm interviewing, like, yeah, like I'm talking to you for 2 hours, and like obviously the movie's only going to be 2 hours. But I said, like, so much of this the beauty of it is so much of it can live as bonus content. So it's not just like wasted, that's on the cutting room floor and nobody's ever going to see it. So, I mean, that's the exciting part about it is
that's awesome.
There's the movie, but then there's all this other material that people can enjoy from the movie.
Fascinating. Anything else after we, have gone fully in depth on this? Anything else that you want to throw out for people to know, other than, maybe shouting out everything that you host and write and share and perform and everything for yourself anymore?
Just like I said, the movie is going to be. The movie is titled "Scored to Death: The Dark Art of Scary Movie Music." It's on Kickstarter through November 1st. You can follow me on social media at Scored to Death on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And some of the videos have been now put onto the Kickstarter campaign that you can see them, but some of them are just kind of right now living on social media. You can buy copies of the books from me directly at Scored to Death or from other book retailers like Amazon. You can also join a mailing list on at the website Scored to Death, so that scoredtodeath.com, so that you can stay up to date with everything in that way. And right now for the Halloween season, for Scored to Death Radio, which is the podcast, I did a massive, it's the longest episode I've done so far. I call it supersized. It's a supersized exploration into the music of the post-Scream 1990s slasher boom. And I was joined by Rachel Reeves, who's a fantastic film and film music journalist, one of my favorites. And she joined me, and we're playing hours of music and talking about them in between the blocks. We talked playing stuff from Scream and Scream 2, and I know what you did last summer. Most exciting, I think, is Christopher Young, who people will know for doing the scores for Hellraiser 2 and Drag Me to Hell and Spider-Man 3 and all kinds of. Chris is a good friend of mine who I interviewed for the first book. He wrote the afterword for my second book, and he will be featured in the documentary. He gave me permission to use a suite of music from Urban Legend that he put together. He's been doing a project that he talks about in the first book, where he's taking all his scores and making like suites out of them, so that they live in their own way, away from the movie, as pieces of music. And he gave me permission to play the Urban Legend one. So we have like kind of a premiere of this suite that he edited he's been working on and put together from his music for Urban Legend. And we're playing that on Scored to Death Radio right now in the 1990s Slash-a-thon. So, but yeah, mostly, really cool. Yeah, we played, I just did a 5-part episode on the music of Goblin, and a lot of the episodes are just me kind of like being a DJ and playing music, and the Goblin stuff is a little more of a documentary kind of feel and audio. There's a lot of information.
Oh, nice.
So I'm kind of like, I'm just kind of stretching my legs. I'm spreading my wings on testing the waters with this podcast,
right,
and changing the format up and doing different things right now to try to keep it exciting for me and hopefully the listeners. But we have 2 episodes dedicated entirely to music from Stephen King movies, and so that's Scored to Death Radio, and you can find that from the Cinematic Sound Radio network. So if you're going to look it up on like iTunes or Spotify, if you can't find it from Scored to Death Radio, Cinematic Sound Radio. And then there's older episodes of Scored to Death, the podcast, where there's interviews that aren't in the books. I like Bill Conti, for instance, who did the Rocky score, and Ted Nugent of all people. So because
All
Bill
right.
Conti did a score for a horror movie called Nomads, which I absolutely love the movie. It's one of John McTiernan's first movies, and Bill Conti composed it, but he kind of composed it in collaboration with Ted Nugent.
Wow.
And Ted Nugent plays guitar on the soundtrack. So, and that soundtrack's never been released, but I love that score and I love that movie. So when I talked to Bill Conti, which we talk a lot about Rocky and Karate Kid and stuff, but when I talked to him about Nomads, he was like, yeah, Ted Nugent. So then I reached out to Uncle Ted and I said, you want to talk about Nomads? And he's like, yeah. So I did an episode, and I talked also on the podcast. I talked to Jim Lang, who did the In the Mouth of Madness score with John Carpenter. So
wow, bringing it
there's
full circle.
There's a lot of stuff to check out for the people that are still awake after listening to me babble for an hour and a half.
Well, it's all meaningful information. Blake, thank you so much for your time. This is going to go far and wide. I'm even really hoping that certain people that I'm going to talk to after this will share it as well, because this is something that needs some very specific spotlights on it. And just again, thank you for all the time and energy put into spotlighting exactly what you're doing.
I appreciate it, and I appreciate you having me on. This was a lot of fun, and maybe someday we can do it where we're not just promoting something, but we can chat about other things too.
We'll dive into something else. Until next time, Blake, thanks, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you, man.
See you, sir.